If you're listening to this, you may drift off before the end. So before you do, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Before we start, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, close your eyes. Just relax, take a deep breath and let everything go. Good night. Now we can begin. It started with a receipt. A simple purchase coffee and a stale kvass from the corner cafe, something to dull the early morning haze. The cashier handed it over absent-mindedly, eyes barely meeting mine. But the moment my fingers touched the thin paper, a strange unease settled in my stomach. The total, $6.66. A coincidence, I told myself. The mind latches onto things like that, sees meaning where there is none. But as I walked down the damp streets, the numbers began to follow. A license plate at the crosswalk blinked 666 in bold black letters. The digital clock inside the subway station flickered, resetting to 666 before correcting itself. The newspaper abandoned on the next seat overbore the date, June 6th. The train lurched forward, and I forced my eyes to the cityscape beyond the smudged glass. Rain drizzled in slow, lazy streaks. The movement of the world outside should have been reassuring, grounding, but instead it felt wrong, as though it wasn't the train moving, but everything else shifting around me. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythmic hum of the tracks. Then came the whisper, soft at first, threading through the rattling metal and the distant murmur of half-asleep passengers. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, more like a thought not my own, settling uninvited in my mind. It's counting down. I snapped my eyes open, heartbeat suddenly loud in my ears. The train had slowed, the overhead display flickered. 6 stops remaining. I stepped off at my station, shaking the thoughts away. But the unease clung to me like the damp air, following me up the stairs, past the flickering streetlight, and into the restless silence of my apartment. Somewhere deep in my gut, I already knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Sleep came, but it was thin and restless, like a film stretched too tight over something beneath. I drifted in and out, slipping between reality and something else, something colder. In the moments when I surfaced, I saw numbers. Not in dreams, but burned behind my eyelids, shifting in the darkness of my room. The red glow of my alarm clock flickered. 5:55. I turned away. When I looked again, it had changed. 5:54. A countdown. I sat up, the weight of the realization pressing against my ribs. The apartment was silent, but not empty. The shadows pooled in the wrong places, stretching where they shouldn't. I reached for my phone, the glow of the screen harsh in the dimness. A notification blinked, a missed call from an unknown number. No voicemail, no message, just the time stamp, 5:55. The air felt heavier as I moved through the apartment. The walls seemed closer than before, the ceiling lower. I opened the window, hoping for fresh air, but the city below was unnervingly still. The streetlights hummed softly, casting long, reaching fingers across the pavement. A bus idled at the corner, doors open, but no one stepped on. No one stepped off, it simply waited. Something in me whispered, "Don't look away," but my eyes flickered, just for a second, and when I looked again, the bus was gone. The street empty. The only thing left was the electronic sign above the stop, glowing in sharp, unforgiving red. 5 stops remaining. The numbers weren't just appearing, they were leading me somewhere. Morning arrived in pieces. The kind of waking that doesn't feel complete, like my body had surfaced, but my mind was still caught in the undercurrent of sleep. My apartment looked the same, but something felt adjusted. I couldn't name it, only sense it. A subtle wrongness in the placement of things, in the way the air seemed just a little too still. I reached for my phone, the movement automatic, and saw the time, 4:44. My breath hitched. It had been 5:55 when I last looked. The numbers were still stepping downward, counting, shifting. I checked my missed calls, another unknown number, another timestamp, 4:44. A sick, sinking feeling settled in my gut. Outside, the world felt quieter than usual. The streets held an unsettling stillness, as though they were waiting. The barista at the cafe barely looked up when I ordered, but when she handed me my change, her fingers hesitated against mine. "You dropped this," she murmured, slipping a crumpled receipt into my palm. I hadn't dropped anything. I unfolded it slowly, my fingers trembling before I even saw what was written. The total, $4.44. I stepped back, the cafe seeming smaller, the walls closer. A whisper of movement caught my eye, a man at the farthest table, face hidden behind an open newspaper. He wasn't reading. I could feel his attention, his presence pressing against the air like something heavy and unseen. I turned to leave, the bell above the door chimed, but the sound felt distant, stretched. The newspaper rustled, but I didn't dare look back. On the sidewalk, my heart pounded against my ribs. The receipt was still clutched in my hand, the ink smudged slightly from my grip. I unfolded it again, willing it to say something else, anything else. But the numbers had already changed. 4 stops remaining. I walked without direction, the city pressing in on all sides. The sun was out, but it gave no warmth. The glass towers reflected the sky in a way that made them seem hollow, like they were only pretending to be buildings. My pulse hadn't settled since I left the cafe. The numbers were getting closer. Whatever was counting down, I was running out of time. I ducked into an alley, needing a moment to breathe. The air here smelled damp, like old brick and rain, soaked concrete. The hum of the city faded to a dull murmur. I leaned against the wall and unfolded the receipt again, half expecting the numbers to shift under my gaze. 4 stops remaining. It was a message, a warning, but for what? Then a sound, a rhythmic tapping, deliberate and steady. I turned my head slowly. At the far end of the alley, a man stood beneath a flickering street lamp. His silhouette was sharp against the light, but his features blurred at the edges, as though he were slightly out of focus. He tapped the face of a pocket watch, once, twice, 3 times. I took a step back. He tilted his head. The pocket watch gleamed, its hands frozen at 3:33. A jolt of fear crawled up my spine. The countdown was still going. The numbers had dropped again. The man took a step forward. I didn't wait to see what he wanted. I turned and pushed through the alley's exit, back onto the main street, heart hammering. But when I looked around, the city felt different. The buildings weren't where they should be. The streets stretched too long, the intersections unfamiliar. I had walked these roads 1,000 times, but now they led somewhere else. I glanced down at the receipt, my hands shaking. The ink had changed again. 3 stops remaining. The city had rearranged itself. I was sure of it. The buildings loomed at unfamiliar angles, their facades blending together as if painted on glass. Street signs bore names I didn't recognize, yet the air smelled the same rain, asphalt, the faint bitterness of burnt coffee. The world was shifting beneath my feet, but it wanted me to believe it hadn't. I turned a corner, hoping to find something familiar, and nearly collided with a street vendor. His cart was filled with newspapers, all dated today. The ink on every headline was smudged except for the numbers, weather reports, stock prices, lottery winnings, each one screaming for attention. My stomach twisted when I saw the time printed on the front page of the topmost paper. 2:22. The countdown hadn't stopped. "You look lost," the vendor said. His voice was rough, like static over an old radio. His eyes never met mine, fixed instead on something behind me. My skin prickled. I hesitated. What could I say? That the city had rearranged itself. That numbers were following me. That time itself was slipping. The vendor reached into his cart and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out without looking. My fingers twitched before accepting it. The paper was warm, as if someone had just written on it. I unfolded it slowly, dreading what I already knew would be there. 2 stops remaining. I looked up, my pulse a hammer in my throat. The vendor was gone. His cart, the newspapers, everything vanished as if they had never been there at all. The city breathed around me, the buildings seeming to lean closer, listening, watching. I ran, not toward anything, just away. But the roads stretched too long, bending into impossible paths. The numbers weren't just counting down. They were leading me somewhere. The city was alive, shifting with each step I took. Streets stretched too long. Intersections led to places they shouldn't. I tried retracing my steps, but every turn brought me somewhere new. The countdown wasn't just following me. It was pulling me forward. I slowed my pace, trying to catch my breath. The air had changed, carrying the faint scent of old paper and dust. I stood in front of a bookstore that hadn't been there before. Its windows were dark, but the door was slightly open. A small bell above it jingled softly as I stepped inside. The store was silent. Bookshelves towered into the shadows, their spines cracked and worn. A single lamp flickered at the counter, illuminating an old man sitting behind it. He didn't acknowledge me, just continued flipping through a ledger filled with neat, precise handwriting. I took a hesitant step forward. "Excuse me." He slid a small notepad toward me without looking up. The page was blank, but when I touched it, ink bloomed across the paper, forming a single number. 111. The countdown had shifted again. I exhaled sharply, my pulse quickening. What does this mean? The old man finally met my gaze. His eyes were dull, unfocused, like he was looking through me instead of at me. "You're almost there," he said, his voice little more than a breath. "The numbers don't lie." The bell above the door jingled again. I turned, expecting someone to enter, but the store was empty. When I looked back, the man was gone. The counter was gone. The bookshelves had disappeared, leaving only a vast, open space filled with nothing but cold air. I was standing in the middle of an empty street. The notepad was still in my hand. I flipped to the next page, fingers trembling. One stop remaining. Words pressed against my mind like a whisper I couldn't unhear. I turned in place, scanning the empty street. The city had peeled away again, leaving only silence and stretched shadows. A clock tower loomed at the end of the street. I didn't remember seeing it before. Its hands were frozen at 1 o'clock, the face cracked, as if something had struck it from within. The air vibrated with a dull, rhythmic hum, like the heartbeat of something just below the surface. I took a step forward. The sound grew louder. The wind picked up, carrying a faint metallic scent. My footfalls echoed, too loud for an empty street. Then I heard them other footsteps, perfectly synchronized with mine. I stopped. They stopped. I turned slowly. A figure stood at the other end of the street, the man from the alley. His pocket watch gleamed in the dim light, the chain swaying slightly. He didn't move, but I could feel his attention, sharp and deliberate. I swallowed hard. "What do you want?" My voice sounded distant, like it didn't belong to me. He tilted his head, and for the first time, I noticed something. His lips didn't move, but I heard his voice, clear as thought. "It's almost time." I took a step back. The notepad burned cold in my grip. When I looked down, the ink had shifted again. 0 stops remaining. The countdown had ended, but something was still coming. The city no longer felt real. It had stretched and warped around me, turning streets I knew into unfamiliar pathways, shifting landmarks like pieces on a board. The notepad in my hands carried the weight of something inevitable. 1 stop remaining. The words pulsed in my mind, their meaning just out of reach. The streetlights above flickered weakly, their glow failing to push back the deepening dusk. The air was thick, carrying the scent of something metallic, something like rust. The pavement stretched too long in both directions, giving me the uneasy sense that I had been placed inside a painting, a carefully crafted illusion with no exit. And then I saw it. At the far end of the street stood a clock tower I didn't recognize. Its skeletal frame loomed against the sky, a jagged silhouette carved into the fading light. The clock face was cracked, a dark fracture splitting it down the middle. Its hands were frozen at 1 o'clock, motionless and silent. But the air vibrated, a deep, rhythmic hum that rattled my ribs, like the tower was breathing. I stepped forward. The hum deepened. The wind stirred, carrying a low murmur, words just beneath the threshold of understanding. My footsteps sounded too loud on the pavement, each one swallowed by the vast, empty stretch of the city. Then another sound joined them. Footsteps. They matched mine perfectly. I froze. The sound stopped with me. My pulse pounded in my throat. Slowly, deliberately, I turned my head, already knowing what I would see. At the other end of the street, just beyond the reach of the flickering streetlights, stood a figure. The man from the alley. His posture was the same, rigid, unmoving. His pocket watch gleamed against the dim light, the chain swaying gently as if caught in a breeze I couldn't feel. His features blurred at the edges, shifting like ink dropped in water, but I knew he was watching me. A deep, unnatural stillness settled over the street. I took a step back. The man didn't move, but his voice wasn't spoken. It pressed against my mind, a soundless whisper that slithered into my thoughts. It's almost time. A cold wave of dread swept through me. I clutched the notepad tighter, my fingers stiff with fear. The ink on the page swam, reshaping itself, and my stomach twisted as I read the new message. 0 stops remaining. A single chime rang out from the clock tower, cutting through the air like a blade. The streetlights buzzed and died. The shadows lengthened, pulling toward me, reaching. The countdown had ended. But something was still coming. The chime from the clock tower hung in the air long after it should have faded. It rang through my bones, vibrating deep in my chest, as if something inside me had been struck like a tuning fork. The world had shifted in that single note, subtle but undeniable. The street, the city, even the sky above felt altered, stretched slightly beyond its natural limits. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move, to breathe. The figure at the far end of the street remained still, but his presence pressed against me, dense and unshakable, like a shadow that had grown too heavy. His pocket watch glinted as it swayed gently from its chain, a rhythm that didn't match the wind. The notepad trembled in my hands. I looked down, half expecting the words to change again. 0 stops remaining. The ink seemed deeper now, as if it had been pressed into the page rather than written. The edges of the paper had darkened, brittle like something ancient. I could feel it pulsing faintly against my fingertips. I took a step back. The pavement felt different beneath my foot, softer, almost pliant. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my gaze downward. The road was no longer smooth asphalt. It was old, weathered cobblestone, slick with moisture, as if a storm had passed through only moments ago. Puddles reflected a distorted version of the sky, clouds moving too quickly across their surface. I turned in a slow circle. The city had changed again. The buildings were taller, their facades draped in ivy and peeling paint. Window panes, some cracked, others missing entirely, gaped like empty eyes. Signs above the doors bore names I didn't recognize, written in a curling, unfamiliar script. I wasn't where I had been moments ago, or rather, I was. But something had folded over reality, shifting it around me, molding it into a place I was never meant to be. A gust of wind rushed through the narrow street, carrying a whisper with it. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a voice. It was a sound, low, rising and falling, curling at the edges like smoke. I shivered as it wrapped around me. The man hadn't moved, but somehow I knew he was closer now. I turned sharply, heart hammering. My eyes flicked back to the pocket watch in his hand. For the first time, the glass covering its face had cracked. A thin, jagged fracture ran across the surface, cutting through the numbers. Through the splintered glass, the hands of the watch ticked forward just once. A single second, a single heartbeat. The whispering wind returned, stronger this time, brushing against my skin like unseen fingertips. A sense of weightlessness filled my limbs, like the moment before stepping off the last stair in the dark. And then, just beneath the sound of the wind, I heard it, faint, distant, but unmistakable. A second chime. The clock tower's bell had rung again. Something had changed. Something had begun. The The second chime hung in the air, reverberating through the twisted streets like a ripple spreading through water. My breath was shallow, my pulse thrumming beneath my skin, but the city around me didn't acknowledge my fear. It remained still, silent, watching. I turned my gaze back toward the man at the end of the street. He was closer now. Not by much, just a few steps, but I knew he hadn't moved. I would have seen it. His presence felt more solid, the air around him bending subtly, like heat rising from pavement. His pocket watch still dangled from its chain, the fractured glass reflecting the dim, shifting light of the warped cityscape. I gripped the notepad, willing the ink to change, to explain, to warn me. But the message remained the same, 0 stops remaining. A gust of wind curled through the alleyways, dragging a breathy whisper along with it. The sound wrapped around my ears, words just out of reach, dissolving before I could fully grasp them. My skin prickled. The air was damp, thick with something I couldn't name, and the scent of wet stone and rust clung to my senses. I turned, searching for an exit. The street stretched endlessly in both directions, an illusion of choice. The buildings, their windows empty and dark, loomed overhead like silent observers. Somewhere in the distance, a flickering light caught my eye. A neon sign, pale and sickly, buzzed against the glass of a storefront. The letters had burned out in places, leaving only fragmented words. The missing letters shifted in my mind, rearranging, trying to make sense. But the more I stared, the more the words refused to settle. They twisted, changed, became something else entirely before vanishing again. The wind shifted, the air grew colder. I took a hesitant step toward the store. The soles of my shoes scraped against the uneven cobblestones, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the thick stillness pressing in from all sides. My reflection wavered in the glass, but it wasn't right. It was slower than my movements, delayed by a fraction of a second, like an old recording playing just behind reality. A handprint bloomed on the inside of the window. It wasn't mine. I stumbled back. The neon light flickered once, twice, then died with a sharp pop. Darkness swallowed the storefront, and for a heartbeat, I swore I saw something move inside. A shape, shifting against the blackness, its edges blurred and uncertain. Then another sound, not the chime of the clock tower, not the wind, a faint, rhythmic tapping. I turned toward the source. My stomach clenched. The man was still at the end of the street, but now his hand was raised. The chain of the pocket watch dangled loosely from his fingers, and his index finger, long, too long, was gently tapping against the cracked glass. Tap, tap, tap. Each sound sent a pulse through the city, like knocking on the surface of something fragile, something ready to break. The whispering wind returned, stronger now, and for the first time I understood the words it carried. "You're running out of time." The notepad in my hands grew impossibly heavy. The ink bled outward, shifting, rewriting itself in slow, deliberate strokes. 17 minutes remain. My throat tightened. I didn't know what would happen when the time ran out. I didn't want to know. The clock tower loomed above, its hands trembling against the cracked face. A third chime rang out. Something had noticed me. Something was waking up. The third chime sent a tremor through the city. The sound wasn't just noise. It was a force, something deep and ancient, pressing against my bones. The cobblestones beneath my feet shuddered, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I had the sensation that the entire world had just slipped. Like a record skipping on an old turntable, I staggered, gripping the notepad as if it could anchor me to something real. The ink continued to shift, swirling like liquid trapped beneath the paper's surface. The words had changed again. 16 minutes remain. A weight settled in my chest. My heartbeat drummed against my ribs, matching the slow, deliberate rhythm of the pocket watch's ticking. I looked up. The man was closer. I hadn't seen him move, hadn't even blinked, but he was no longer at the end of the street. He stood beneath the clock tower now, his shadow stretching unnaturally across the uneven stones. The cracked glass of his pocket watch reflected the dim glow of the streetlights, fractured light dancing along the contours of his face. His expression was unreadable, but his presence was suffocating. Another gust of wind slithered through the alleyways, carrying that same whispering voice. "You're running out of time." I turned sharply, scanning for a way out. The buildings loomed taller than before, pressing inward, their walls lined with crooked doorways and shattered windows. The neon sign I had seen earlier had changed again, its letters flickering in and out of existence like a dying heartbeat. The missing letters taunted me. My mind filled in the gaps, but the answer wouldn't solidify. Something was keeping me from understanding, from piecing it together. A soft scraping sound echoed behind me, slow, deliberate. I didn't turn around, I couldn't. The air was too thick, charged with a static weight that made my skin prickle. I felt watched not just by the man, but by the city itself. The buildings, the streets, the empty windows, they were all waiting. Waiting for what? The wind whispered again. This time the words were clearer. "You've been here before." A chill crawled down my spine. My grip on the notepad tightened. No, that wasn't possible. I had never seen this place before tonight. I would remember, wouldn't I? The streetlights flickered. The pavement beneath me seemed to ripple, as though I were standing on the surface of a pond. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. My steps were slow at first, hesitant, but then tap. The sound stopped me cold. It came from ahead of me, not behind. I lifted my gaze. The man stood still beneath the clock tower, his posture unchanged. But his hand, the one that held the pocket watch, was no longer at his side. He had lifted it, and he was tapping against the cracked glass. Tap, a second tap. The chime of the clock tower had faded, but this sound was worse. It felt directed, personal, as if it wasn't just a meaningless noise but a message, a signal meant only for me. The ink on the notepad twisted again. New words formed, slow and deliberate. The numbers follow you because you followed them first. My breath hitched. The air felt heavier, thicker. My body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Something terrible, something inevitable. The wind shifted. The neon sign sparked violently, letters rearranging themselves in a final, flickering burst before it died out completely. A sharp pressure built behind my eyes. The scraping sound returned, closer now, and then a fourth chime. The entire city exhaled, and the door in front of me, the one I hadn't seen before, began to open. The door opened with a slow, reluctant groan, as if the very wood resisted what lay beyond it. The air that seeped out carried no temperature, no scent, just an emptiness so profound it made my skin crawl. I hesitated at the threshold, my breath shallow, the notepad trembling in my grip. The ink swirled again, but this time it did not form words. It pulsed, alive beneath the paper, shifting in erratic, liquid patterns as though it were waiting. Behind me, the fourth chime still echoed in my bones, stretching impossibly long, reverberating through the street like a warning. The man beneath the clock tower had not moved, but I could feel the weight of his gaze pressing into me. I didn't have to look at him to know that his pocket watch was still tapping against the glass. Tap, 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 an invitation or a command. The doorway loomed before me, dark and waiting. The walls around it were uneven, shifting, as if they weren't built but rather grown into place. I swallowed against the tightening in my throat. There was no turning back now. The numbers would not let me. I stepped inside. The silence swallowed me whole. It was not the absence of sound, but something deeper, an unnatural stillness that made my heartbeat seem like an intrusion. The room stretched wide, impossibly large compared to the narrow entrance. Shadows curled along the walls, shifting in and out of the dim light. There was furniture, but it was all wrong. Chairs with too many legs, tables that sloped as if caught mid-melt. A lamp flickered in the corner, its glow the sickly color of an old bruise. My footsteps did not echo. The floor beneath me wasn't quite wood, nor was it stone. It felt soft, pliant, like stepping on thick layers of paper stacked endlessly deep. I glanced down, and my stomach clenched. Not paper, Not exactly. Receipts, thousands of them, maybe more, stretching in all directions, layered upon each other like sediment. They bore my name, my handwriting. Some were familiar grocery store purchases, coffee shop orders, train tickets. But others I had never seen before. A hotel reservation from a city I had never visited. A flight boarding pass for a date that hadn't happened yet. A hospital bill. My breath came faster. My fingers twitched over the notepad, but the ink refused to form words now. The air pressed heavier against my skin. Something was here, beyond the reach of the flickering lamp. Watching, and then a whisper. Not a voice, not words, but a sensation that trickled through the room like the first cold touch of rain. The receipts rustled beneath my feet, as if shifting in response. The shadows along the walls moved not like light flickering, but like something breathing. A shape stirred in the corner, not a person, not exactly. Its form was blurred, indistinct, as though it was being remembered incorrectly. A suit that flickered between black and gray, hands that twitched in and out of focus, and at the center of it, where a face should have been, numbers. Not written, not displayed, moving, rolling endlessly, shifting like the dials of an old clock, flickering through sequences too fast for my mind to grasp. My pulse thundered in my ears. The shadowed figure took a step forward. The receipts shivered. The lamp dimmed. And then it spoke, not with sound, not with words, but with numbers, spilling from the shifting void of its face, spiraling into my thoughts like an infection. 0. The ink on my notepad surged. The weight in my skull grew unbearable. And outside, beneath the clock tower, the 5th chime began to ring. The 5th chime rang through the walls, through the floor, through my ribs. It didn't fade like a normal sound should. It stayed, lingering in the air, vibrating inside my skull. The shadowed figure did not move, but I could feel it watching. Its shifting, numb, riddled face a whirlpool of meaning I couldn't grasp. The receipts beneath my feet stirred, whispering against each other like dry leaves in a windless forest. Then a single slip of paper rose from the pile. It lifted without touch, hovering in the thick, suffocating air before me. The ink on it shifted, rewriting itself over and over, until it settled into something legible. Total, $0. Change given, 0. Balance due, 0. A tremor crawled down my spine. I reached for it, but the moment my fingers brushed the surface, the ink moved again. The numbers on the receipt rippled like disturbed water, breaking apart, reforming into something else. Time left 0. The shadowed figure took another step forward. The lamp in the corner flickered and failed, plunging the room into near darkness. The glow from its shifting numbers became the only light, pulsing with an unnatural, rhythmic intensity. The walls around us seemed to tighten, the ceiling inching lower, the room compressing like a lung deflating. I tried to move back, but the receipts resisted. They curled around my ankles, growing damp, their edges darkening as though soaking up something unseen. My breath caught. The scent of old ink and static filled my nose. The figure loomed closer, its presence pressing against my skin like the weight of unseen hands. I had to get out. I turned sharply, my foot slipping on the shifting paper. The darkness thickened, slowing my movements as though I waded through unseen waters. My fingers curled around the notepad, but when I looked down at it, the pages were no longer blank. The ink had decided to write on its own. 536, 537, 538, a sequence. A progression, a countdown, but to what? I forced myself forward, pushing toward the door I had come through. It was still there just barely, its edges flickering like a weak radio signal. My pulse thundered as I reached for the handle, but just before my fingers closed around it, the shadowed figure behind me spoke again. Not in words, not in whispers, but in numbers. The sequence from my notepad left its featureless face and filled the air around me, sinking into my ears, my mind, my very bones. The numbers shouldn't have had sound, shouldn't have carried weight, but they did. 541, 542, 543, It was counting down faster, and I realized with a sharp twist of horror that the numbers were not mine anymore. They were marking me. The door was no longer an exit. It was a threshold, and something waited on the other side. The receipts coiled tighter around my feet. The air hummed, the walls trembled, and then the sixth chime rang. The sound split through the space like a razor, tearing through the darkness, through me. My vision blurred, twisting like an old film reel unraveling in reverse. The shadowed figure stopped. The receipts beneath me burned away in silence, and suddenly I was somewhere else. The world around me had changed, but the numbers had followed. The silence was immense. Not the kind of quiet that settles between words or lingers in empty rooms, but a dense, pressurized stillness. A silence that listened. It pressed against my ears, stretched out into the distance, and made the air feel thick, like the world had been wrapped in glass. I stood on the edge of a vast, empty street. Buildings stretched upward, their windows dark and hollow, like vacant eye sockets in a decaying skull. The pavement beneath my feet felt uneven, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The streetlights overhead flickered, their glow unnatural, pulsing in time with something unseen. And then, from the far end of the road, came a sound, not footsteps, not wind, a mechanical clicking, precise and deliberate. A turn of gears, a recalibration. I looked down. The numbers were still with me. On my wrist, written in ink that I hadn't placed there, a sequence glowed softly beneath my skin. 7:40, 9. 7:50, 7:51. The numbers moved, counting upward. A shift, a break from the countdown. And I felt something watching. The buildings, the street, the sky itself seemed to lean inward, bending toward me, waiting for something. The mechanical clicking continued, growing louder, closer, like unseen hands adjusting the gears of a clock too massive for the mind to grasp. I took a step forward. The pavement shivered beneath me. Another step. The numbers on my wrist pulsed. The sky changed. The stars above were not where they should have been. They flickered, rearranged, as if something in the universe had decided to rewrite the night. The constellations twisted, shifting into symbols I didn't recognize, or rather, symbols I was only just beginning to remember. The mechanical clicking stopped. A single slip of paper fluttered down from above, carried on an unseen wind. It landed at my feet, pristine white against the dark pavement. The ink on it was still fresh, still wet. I reached down, my fingers trembling, and turned it over. It wasn't a receipt this time. It was a ticket. Departure 7:54. Arrival unknown seat 1, 1. The number sent a ripple through my mind, breaking something open. A door I hadn't realized was locked. A train horn echoed through the city. I turned, and the empty street was no longer empty. The train station stood at the intersection, where it had not been before. Its platform stretched into the distance, dissolving into thick fog. Its roof lined with flickering bulbs that pulsed in the same unnatural rhythm as my numbers. The doors to the train were open. I stepped toward it, but something stopped me. A reflection. In the dark window of the nearest train car, I saw myself. Or rather, a version of myself. They stood inside the train, looking out. Their expression was unreadable, but I knew, I just knew, that if I stepped forward, I would not be the same person when I stepped inside. The ticket in my hand burned hot. The numbers on my wrist pulsed. 7:53, 7:54. The train doors slid shut. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The train was gone, and the city was no longer watching. But the numbers were still there, and they were waiting. The train station was gone as if it had never existed, leaving behind only the empty street and the flickering lights overhead. But something had changed. The numbers on my wrist still pulsed, glowing softly beneath the skin, but they were not counting down anymore. They were counting up. 7:56, 7:57. The air felt heavier now, as if gravity itself was uncertain, shifting just enough to make every breath feel strange. I took a step forward, and the pavement beneath me felt different, softer, like damp earth instead of concrete. And then I saw them. A row of payphones lined the sidewalk ahead. Identical, unused, out of place. The plastic casings were cracked, their metal coin slots rusted with time. I hadn't seen a payphone in years, yet here they stood, perfectly spaced apart, humming with a quiet, low static. One of them was ringing. I hesitated, but my feet moved forward, drawn toward the sound. The receiver was cold when I lifted it, pressing it to my ear. The static grew louder, then a voice. My own voice. "You're running out of time." I nearly dropped the phone. The voice on the other end was mine, but it was distorted, stretched, like a recording played back at the wrong speed. "What is this?" I whispered. The voice didn't answer. Instead it laughed. A hollow, empty sound, like something mimicking laughter without understanding what it meant. Then the line went dead. The screen on the payphone flickered to life. More numbers. Departure, 8 o'clock. Arrival, unknown, seat 1. That same ticket. That same single seat. I turned, expecting to see the train station again. But the street had changed. The buildings had twisted, rearranged themselves into something unfamiliar. The windows were still dark, but now they seemed deeper, as if staring into them would pull me inside. The payphones behind me let out a sharp burst of static. All of them were ringing now. Dozens of payphones, their shrill tones overlapping, screaming into the night. And then they stopped, a sound behind me. Footsteps. I spun around. The street was empty, but the numbers on my wrist continued to rise. 7:59, the final moment before 8 o'clock. Something was about to happen, and I wasn't sure if I was meant to arrive or depart. The final minute before 8 o'clock stretched unnaturally long, like the universe itself was hesitating. The air felt thick, weighted with something unseen, as if reality had been stretched too thin and was waiting to snap back. The street had shifted again, but this time I didn't see it happen. It was simply different. The buildings weren't just unfamiliar. They were wrong. They slouched at angles that defied logic, their windows elongated and too deep, as if they led into endless tunnels instead of empty rooms. The street lamps curved toward the ground like wilted flowers, their lights flickering in unnatural patterns, casting shadows where nothing stood. But the strangest part was the silence, not a peaceful quiet, but a silence that was listening. I took a breath and felt it press against me. Something was waiting. Then, from behind me, a single sound. Click, a payphone, its receiver off the hook. I turned slowly. The same row of payphones stood where they had before, but now, one of them was swinging gently, as if someone had just let go of it. The receiver dangled, spinning on its cord. A soft hiss of static leaked through, whispering against the silence. I should have walked away, but instead I reached for it. The moment my fingers brushed the cold plastic, the static shifted. Not random noise, numbers, a voice asterisk asterisk, my voice asterisk asterisk, murmuring in a slow, deliberate rhythm. 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock. A sharp chime rang through the air, like the toll of a distant bell. I pulled my hand away. The city had changed again. The sky was darker now, too dark, like a night with no moon. The street had narrowed, twisting into an alleyway I had never seen before. The buildings leaned closer, their edges blurred, as if they were waiting for me to step inside their walls. And in the distance a familiar sound, a train horn. It wasn't the sound of arrival. It was the sound of departure. I reached into my pocket and felt the paper between my fingers before I even thought to check. The ticket. Departure 8 o'clock. Arrival unknown, seat 1. And the numbers on my wrist, they had stopped counting. 8 o'clock, time had run out. I looked up. The train station was ahead of me again, its platform stretching into the distance, disappearing into heavy fog. The train stood waiting, its doors open, but there was something different this time. Someone was already inside. A figure sat in seat 1, and as the train doors began to slide shut, they turned their head, just enough for me to see their face. It was me. The train doors slid shut with a quiet finality, a sound like the exhale of something vast and unseen. I hadn't stepped forward, hadn't moved, but somehow I was already too late. The station was empty, and the train was no longer waiting. It was leaving. The wheels groaned against the tracks, a slow, deliberate motion that sent a tremor through the air. I should have been on that train, or maybe I never should have come near it at all, and yet I was already inside. Through the window, beyond the swirling mist, I saw myself sitting in seat 1, not just a reflection. Another version of me. The other me stared out, meeting my gaze with an expression I couldn't recognize. Calm, knowing, resigned. They didn't reach for the window, didn't try to call out. They simply watched. And then, as the train pulled farther away, they did something impossible. They lifted their wrist and showed me the numbers, not counting down, not counting up, just one number. 0. A shudder passed through me, not from cold, but from understanding. The numbers weren't a warning. They were a destination. Something moved in the fog behind the train. A shape, no, multiple shapes. Figures emerging from the mist, stepping onto the empty platform. They weren't quite visible, not yet, but I could feel them. Their presence pressed against my skin, a sensation like standing too close to a speaker with the volume just low enough to hum. I took a step back. The figures moved forward, and then the train's horn split the air, a deep, echoing sound that vibrated through my chest. It wasn't a farewell, it was an alarm, a whisper behind me, a single breath too close to my ear. You missed your stop. I turned, but there was nothing there. The numbers on my wrist had changed, no longer counting, just 2 words, last chance. I ran. The station warped around me, shifting like something barely holding itself together. The ground stretched beneath my feet, the corridors lengthened. The air pressed against me like invisible hands pushing me away. I had missed the train, but something else was waiting. I wasn't sure if it was better or worse. I ran without direction, without thought, only knowing that I had to get away before whatever stood on that platform reached me. My breath came in sharp, ragged bursts, but the air felt thick, resisting me, as if I were running through water. The numbers on my wrist still glowed with their new message, last chance. I pushed through the station doors, expecting to step into the city streets. But the world outside had changed. The sky was deep indigo, absent of stars, stretching endlessly over a landscape that should not have existed. No streets, no buildings, only an expanse of empty train tracks stretching in every direction. The ground beneath me was smooth iron, humming faintly, as if something enormous was just beneath its surface, waiting. The whisper from before ***, the voice that had spoken right into my ear ***, was gone, but something was watching. I turned slowly. The figures from the platform had followed me. They weren't running, they weren't even walking. They were simply there, closer now. Shadows in the shape of people, outlines blurred like something unfinished. I couldn't see their eyes, but I felt them watching. And the worst part, the part that made my stomach twist, was the realization that they weren't strangers. They were familiar. I knew them. I didn't know how or from where, but the recognition settled into my bones, undeniable. Faces from old photographs, passengers I'd passed on the street, voices from dreams I couldn't remember after waking. They had been following me for a long time, and now they had caught up. A chime rang through the air, sharp and final. A single train stood on the tracks now, gleaming silver under the colorless sky. Not the same one I had missed. This one was different, older, quieter, waiting. The doors stood open. The cabin beyond them was dark. And beside the entrance, standing perfectly still, was myself. Not a reflection, not a hallucination. Another version of me, wearing the same clothes, holding the same expression as the version I had seen inside the last train. But there was something different now. This version of me had no numbers on their wrist. Their eyes met mine, and for the first time since the countdown had started, I heard my own voice speaking back at me. "You're out of time." I had no choice. I stepped onto the train. The doors slid shut behind me. The figures on the platform did not follow. But they didn't have to. They had already won. The train doors sealed shut with a quiet hiss, locking me inside. The cabin was silent, the air heavy with something I couldn't name, not dust, not warmth, but something thick and waiting. The other version of me, the one who had been standing outside, was gone. The only movement came from the flickering lights above, dim bulbs swaying slightly, though the train hadn't started moving yet. No engine rumble, no shift of momentum, just stillness. And then, the numbers on my wrist changed. I looked down, expecting another countdown. Instead, I saw a name, my name, nothing else. No time, no warnings, just my name, glowing faintly, as if it had always been there, as if it belonged to me more than I did. A rustling sound came from further down the train car. I wasn't alone. I turned my head slowly, my breath caught in my throat. The rows of empty seats stretched ahead, but something wasn't right. The fabric was shifting, like someone had just stood up. A faint indent still lingered in the cushions. The armrests swayed slightly, as if a hand had just left them. Then a voice, soft, distant, coming from the farthest row. "You've taken my seat." A cold prickle ran down my spine. I couldn't see anyone. The voice had weight. It wasn't imagined, it was real. Someone, or something, was here with me. The train gave a soft jolt, not forward, downward. The sensation made my stomach lurch, as if gravity had shifted. The floor felt unstable, the walls stretching taller, the ceiling pressing lower. The space around me wasn't fixed. I took a cautious step forward, gripping the nearest seat for balance. The moment my fingers touched the fabric, it pulsed beneath my skin. Like a heartbeat, the rustling sound came again, this time closer. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. The lights flickered once more, and in that brief moment of darkness, I saw them. A figure, standing at the far end of the train car. Not quite in focus, a shape more than a person, a presence more than a being, but it was there, watching. And then, before the lights returned, it whispered my name, not a warning, not a threat, a statement. Like it had always known me. The train lurched again, still sinking, still taking me somewhere I wasn't sure I wanted to go. And in the reflection of the nearest window, I saw something that made my breath stop entirely. The seats were no longer empty. Every row was filled with shadowed figures, all sitting in perfect stillness, all facing forward, all waiting. For what, I didn't know, but I had a feeling I was about to find out. The train kept descending. I could feel it, though the windows showed nothing but endless black. Not tunnels, not motion. Blurred scenery, just a vast, empty darkness. I gripped the nearest seat, the fabric still pulsing beneath my palm. The sensation was worse now. Not just a heartbeat, a rhythm. A slow, steady countdown, ticking away beneath my skin. The figures in the seats did not move. They did not breathe. But I could feel their attention pressing against me, an invisible weight settling onto my chest. And then, for the first time since stepping onto this train, one of them turned. A slow, deliberate movement. Not the head, not the shoulders, just the eyes. Two pale reflections of the overhead lights, dull and distant, fixing on me with quiet recognition. I opened my mouth, to speak, to demand answers, to scream. But no sound came. The train jolted, the lights flickered. And suddenly, I was somewhere else. The aisle stretched impossibly long, seats fading into a colorless haze. Not a train anymore, not entirely. The overhead compartments were gone, the walls were shifting, the air was colder. Something in the distance was moving toward me, a shape in the farthest row, a silhouette, but familiar. Me, not a reflection, not a hallucination. Another version of myself, staring back from the opposite end of the aisle. This one looked different, tired, worn, like someone who had been here longer than they should have. And when they lifted their arm, I saw their wrist. No numbers, just scars. deep, dark ridges where numbers had once been. Carved away, erased, like someone had tried to remove them. The realization struck me harder than anything else. They had tried to escape, and they had failed. The countdown had ended for them. The train shuddered. The figures in the seats leaned forward just slightly. Not much, not enough to move, just enough to let me know they had noticed. The other version of me opened their mouth to speak. But before any sound could come, the lights cut out completely. Everything went black, and in the dark, something whispered. Not from the other me, not from the seated figures, but from everywhere. A single, final message: you are running out of time. The darkness swallowed everything, not the kind of darkness that comes from a flickering light, but something deeper. A silence so vast it felt like the world had been erased, leaving only me, floating in the absence of everything. I didn't move, I couldn't, because I wasn't sure if there was even ground beneath me anymore. Then, a breath. Not mine, something exhaled softly, just inches from my ear. The air shifted, carrying a scent that wasn't entirely unfamiliar. Damp, metallic, like old train tracks rusting in the rain, like time itself had corroded. Then, the numbers on my wrist burned. A searing, electric sensation shot through my arm, forcing my body to react. My breath came in sharp gasps as I clutched my wrist, feeling the heat radiating from beneath my skin. The numbers were changing, faster than they ever had before, not just counting down racing, flashing sequences so quickly that my mind couldn't keep up. And then, just as abruptly as it started, it stopped. One number remained, 5, not a time, not a countdown. Just 5, then. The train was back, or at least the shape of it. The rows of seats stretched ahead, but they were different now. The fabric was shredded, stuffing spilling out like something had torn through them in a blind panic. The lights were dimmer, casting elongated shadows that didn't match the seats. And the figures, they were standing now. All of them perfectly still, perfectly silent, all facing me, waiting. I forced myself to move, to step back. But my foot hit something solid. Not the floor, a body. I turned slowly, dreading what I would see. It was the other me, collapsed on the ground, face obscured, wrist limp and exposed. The scars were gone. The numbers had returned, but they were different. Not a countdown anymore, not random digits. They matched mine, 5. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening as I took an unsteady step forward. One of the figures twitched, not a full movement, just the tilt of a head. A slow, deliberate shift, as if acknowledging something. A realization settled into my bones, cold and unshakable. The countdown wasn't just marking time. It was marking something else. Something I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. The train lurched forward. For the first time since I had stepped inside, it was moving. The train was moving. I didn't feel the acceleration, only the steady vibration beneath my feet. A rhythm, pulsing in time with my own heartbeat. The air was different now, thicker, as if pressing in from all sides, yet there was no wind, no motion beyond the slow glide of the train through unseen tracks. I didn't want to look behind me, but I did. The other version of me was still on the floor. The wrist, my wrist, still displayed the number 5. The figures in the seats hadn't moved, but I could feel them shifting in some way that wasn't physical. They were more present, not passengers, not statues, something else entirely. I turned away, forcing myself to move down the aisle. If the train was moving, it had to be heading somewhere, and I needed to be ahead of whatever waited at the end of the track. Then, from behind me, a scrape, fabric against fabric, a slow, deliberate sound. I turned again. The seated figures were standing now. All of them, rows of them, stretching back into the dim light, faces blurred as if they had never been meant to be seen clearly. And in the very last row, the other me was standing too, not fully upright, just rising, head still tilted down. The weight of their presence was unbearable. Then, without warning, the lights flickered, and they were closer. Not a slow movement, not a step, just closer. I stumbled backward, gripping the walls for support. The numbers on my wrist pulsed, the ink burning beneath my skin. The train was speeding up, and that's when I heard it, a distant chime, as if coming from the front of the train. A sound I knew, a station bell. The train was going to stop, and I wasn't sure I wanted to see what was waiting for me when it did. The station bell echoed again, distant but drawing closer. The train was still in motion, but the weight of the approaching stop pressed against my chest. I gripped the walls of the swaying car, trying to steady myself, but the lights overhead flickered erratically, casting long, twitching shadows over the rows of motionless figures. No, not motionless, they were breathing now. I could hear it. A slow, measured inhale, followed by an even slower exhale. A synchronized rhythm, as if they all shared a single set of lungs. The chime rang out again, closer. I forced my feet forward, my pulse hammering in my ears. If I could reach the front of the train, maybe I could get off before the door at the far end slid open. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of something old, wet earth, rust, something deeper, something that had been waiting. And then, the footsteps, slow, measured, deliberate. Someone, or something, was boarding. The figures in the seats tilted their heads in eerie unison, acknowledging whatever had just entered. And then, as if they had never been there at all, they sat back down. Not with jerky or unnatural motion, but smoothly, like actors in a well-rehearsed play. As if the moment for them to rise had passed, and now it was no longer their role to move. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to step forward. The door at the far end remained open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. The train was still moving, but the station bell rang out once more. It was time to stop. I glanced down at my wrist. 4 had become 3. The train lurched, the lights dimmed, and the final station began to take shape outside the windows. The train shuddered as it neared the station, but the movement felt wrong. It wasn't the steady deceleration of a train preparing to stop. It was unsteady, reluctant, like something was pulling it back. The air inside the car had thickened, heavy, dense. The figures in their seats remained still, but the feeling of being watched had grown unbearable. Not just from them, from something ahead. I took a slow, cautious step forward. The open door at the end of the car yawned into darkness. Beyond it, the next car should have been visible. Instead, it was empty space, a void that shouldn't exist. And then a voice, not from behind me, not from the figures, from inside the darkness. "You are almost there." I froze. The voice wasn't unfamiliar. It was layered, as if spoken by more than one version of the same person, overlapping, whispering in unison. But beneath the distortion, beneath the impossible echo, I recognized it. It was mine. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I took another step forward, the weight of the train pressing against my spine. Outside the window, the station was coming into view. It wasn't empty. Figures stood on the platform, just like the ones inside the train, motionless, waiting. But these ones were different. Their faces weren't blurred. They were identical to mine, every single one. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. The figures outside turned their heads in unison, as if sensing my realization. Then, in the reflection of the window, I saw the number on my wrist change. 3 had become 2. The train lurched again. The doors were about to open. The train screeched as it pulled into the station, but the sound was muted, as if it came from far away. The air was still, yet thick with expectation, as if the station itself was holding its breath. Outside, the figures stood waiting. Hundreds of them, all identical, all me. Their faces were blank, not expressionless, but truly blank, smooth, featureless, as if unfinished. And then, as one they smiled, the doors slid open. A sharp gust of wind swept through the car, carrying with it a scent I couldn't place, like old paper, dust, and something bitter. The figures inside the train remained seated, their heads still tilted slightly downward. They had no reason to rise anymore. The presence I had felt, the weight pressing against my mind, the silent knowledge that I was being watched, was stronger than ever. Something wanted me to step outside. I didn't move. The train doors remained open. I glanced at my wrist. 2 had become 1. My pulse roared in my ears. I wasn't ready. And yet somewhere in the distance, another chime rang out. Another train, or maybe the same one. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance at the reflection in the window. The figures outside were no longer standing still. They were stepping forward, moving toward the train. Toward me, I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The numbers on my wrist burned, as if carved into my skin. The train lurched beneath me, not pulling forward, but pulling back, as if resisting, as if refusing to stay here. And then I saw it, a single figure in the crowd, standing at the center of the platform, not blurred. Not blank, it had my face, but unlike the others. It wasn't smiling, it was waiting, and the moment I saw it, the train doors began to close. The doors were closing. I should have let them, but something in me, something deeper than fear, deeper than instinct, refused. I lunged forward. My fingers caught the edge of the door just before it sealed shut. It wasn't smooth metal anymore. It was warm, like skin. I recoiled, but the moment I pulled away, the doors slid open again, welcoming me out. The figures on the platform stood motionless. Hundreds of them, copies of me, featureless and silent, all except for one, the figure in the center. The one with my face. It took a step forward. I did too. The train behind me shuddered, its presence weakening, fading. The lights inside flickered wildly, and for the first time I realized something. There had never been a conductor. There had never been a destination. This train, this place existed only to bring me here. I turned back toward the figure. It was standing directly in front of me now. Up close, it was worse. Its face was identical, but there was something hollow in its eyes. Like looking into a mirror after forgetting your own reflection. It tilted its head, studying me. Then, in my own voice, it whispered, "You are almost there." I didn't feel my lips move, but the words came from my mouth. The number on my wrist pulsed, the ink cracking like old paint. Then it vanished. Not just the last number, all of them. I staggered back. The air around me shifted, thickened, pressed in. The other figures on the platform finally reacted, but not by moving. They were disappearing, one by one, blurring, fading, unraveling like unfinished thoughts. And so was the station. The lights above flickered, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I saw nothing. No platform, no train, no space, no ground, no sky. Just me, and the last figure, still standing before me. It smiled, and then it stepped forward, and I stepped back, into the nothing. Somewhere far away, a train chime rang. Somewhere far away, a new ticket was printed. And somewhere, in a place that wasn't quite real, a number appeared. 1, the end.